autumn harvest. And what could make more sense than to rake up all these leaves? Hey, we wouldn't want the soil getting all the nutrients. But why can't we come up with an animal to help us do the work? Dogs love playing with sticks. Can't we train a dog to rake leaves? Maybe not. You know what autumn always reminds me of? The sunburst finish on an electric guitar. Am I wrong? Come to think of it, that bass guitar I used to play as a kid had an autumn red color. This is when I first got it. Wow, that bass has really aged. I sure enjoyed those times. You know, I haven't been in a musical group in over 18 months. I guess I never really could let it go. But to be young and in a rock and roll band, that's the best. You hear people say I could do this or that forever, but it's true for me. I could have done that forever. I wouldn't want to go back now, though. I love my wife, and I'd miss her way too much. Well, maybe for a couple of weeks. Of course, to get the band rolling again, it'd probably take a good month. I tell you what, if I could just go back for one summer, my wife would never have to remind me about yard work again. I'd rake these leaves up individually as they hit the ground. Of course, when I look back on those days, I always think about what happened to Walker.
Good evening. 30 to 40 persons, including some Americans, have been killed by a band of Arab terrorists at the Rome and Athens airports. It's the worst incident like this so far.
God, it was horrible. All these years later, and I still can't completely believe it. Walker was such a cool person, and he deserved so much more out of life. I always wanted to do something, you know, to honor him. That sounds so formal. I guess just to give him his props, especially since his story is so relevant to what we're going through now. Oh well, another year's almost gone. At least I still have my memories. What the? I see now, this is the time. Okay, Walker Heywood, here's your movie. And once again, old friend, it's time to rock out.
So how are we gonna get this started? I wanna send a memo to the human race. We've got to get past killing each other. It's more than wrong, it's a real disgrace. You kill somebody to settle a score. You turn around and you face for more. Grown-up children matter what you did, and now they want to try and kill your kid. Oh no, oh no. And it's gotta stop for everybody's good. This is only a movie, but we did what we could. It's called Starring Walker Heywood. Starring Walker Heywood. Come on.
Wow, that really blew. Not the song, the volcano. This is Mount St. Helens, folks. Time to get serious. Into each life, a few cataclysmic events must fall, and the eruption of Mount St. Helens fell into mine. By the way, whoever wrote A Little Rain Must Fall never lived in Portland, Oregon. And this is 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So what are cataclysmic events? They're the big ones. They stick out like mountains in our lives. They're the ones that cause the most change and make us who we are. I suppose just being born is the first mountain. I mean, you're suddenly in a new world with your lifelines cut, and you're in awe, wondering how you got here and what's going to happen next. That's why I appreciated the eruption of Mount St. Helens so much. See, people lose that awe. Around here, we like to think we're in charge of the Pacific Northwest. We can build for earthquakes. We can dam up the rivers. We can even put out the forest fires eventually. But when one of these volcanoes wakes up, it's obvious who runs this neighborhood. They do. And they don't even know we're here. That's Mount Hood. Doesn't it look nice and peaceful? Well, recently a heavy rain hit a debris field up there and turned it into what the local paper called a river of rock. It smashed up trees, threw around boulders the size of SUVs. That mountain's not peaceful. It just had a volcanic event in the early 1900s, and it could wake up any time. Now see that other slope past the left shoulder of Mount St. Helens? That's a massive mountain called Mount Rainier. If that bastard ever goes off, the people of Seattle could be having lattes made out of lava. When Mount St. Helens started rumbling, everyone got involved. Oh, we had meetings. We even put sensors on the mountain. All the sensors came back with the same message. You are screwed. You may think you're in charge, but you're not. You may think you're living in Pacific Standard Time, but you're not. You're living in Mountain Time now. So shut up, hunker down, and wait till it's over. I found that sort of refreshing. For a while there, we were definitely awestruck again. See, these mountains have wisdom. They can teach you things. One thing I learned is if a mountain near you starts expanding 5 to 7 feet a day, you better take note. You might even want to take heed. In fact, it may be best just to take off. It's amazing, really. A mountain just sits there pretty much the same for hundreds of years, and then one day it's time. It may even be 8:32 on a nice morning in May of 1980 when it just decides to go boom. And even though Mount St. Helens had been warning us for 2 months, over 50 people were killed. And I saw the shape of a mountain change in one day. Afterwards, the core was gone, and one whole side was blasted out. The summit alone lost over 1,300 feet. You know how tall that is? That's almost exactly the height of the World Trade Center. Ah, the World Trade Center. Now there was a cataclysmic event. People may disagree about what it really was and how it was used, but everybody agrees that this was one of the big cataclysmic events in American history. Now, I don't want to sound old or anything, but my friend Walker Heywood was killed in 1973, the same year the World Trade Center opened. And his death was the biggest cataclysmic event of my life, so far anyway. Sure, losing my parents was the worst, but this was the most cataclysmic, bigger than the volcano going off, bigger than 9/11. See, I was really young, and it just hit me all wrong. I was so young, I thought it might just fade from my memory in time. I even made a pledge that day not to forget about Walker. That's how naive I was. I didn't realize his death and the way he was killed would go on bothering me for decades, that it would be one of the mountains in my life. But it is. This is the first of several disclaimers I will be making in this movie. This one involves the idea of portraying all Arab people as terrorists in Hollywood movies or in the media. I know it gets very old. I was born and raised in the Middle East. I understand the problem. And you're wondering, why am I doing a movie that talks about Arab terrorists killing my friend? It's simple. That is what happened. I want to make a movie about my friend. I regret having to say it, but that is what happened. I have pictures of the people who did it. This is not a myth. This is not a hoax. This is not a false flag operation. This is real. It's not easy talking about death, horror, burning to death, terrorism, and all that stuff. I find it difficult. I've spent my life avoiding that kind of thing. That's what this is about. I've avoided this topic. I didn't face up to it appropriately. I didn't deal with the people that the family of the person that was killed. I haven't seen them since he was alive. And this is a family that I grew up with. I'm not ashamed of it. I understand it, but I know it's wrong. And that's what this movie's going to be about. I'm going to reunite with them here in a little while. And I haven't seen them in maybe 34 years or something. So that's going to be worthwhile for all of us, and hopefully for you. I did something wrong. I mean, really wrong. I made a bad mistake, and now I have to own up to it and try to fix it. To do that, I have to tell you what happened, and more importantly, why I think it happened. Are you ready for a mystery? Okay, these mountains right here, Mount Hood, Mount Adams, Mount St. Helens, and Mount Rainier, are going to help me do that. In fact, they hold the answer to what killed Walker Heywood. Kind of intriguing, isn't it?
Oh, say, so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the billows fight. O'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, they flew through the night, and that our flag was still there. Oh, say does the Star-Spangled Banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Hello and welcome to a spectacular day in Portland, Oregon. It's actually raining really hard right now, but this is just a special effects shot I threw together. Like it? See, my name is Bill McDonald. I'm a novice filmmaker, but I'm also a professional comedy writer, former banquet waiter, and lifelong musician, so we're covered on this. You might say, well, how could you do a special effects shot this involved if you're just a novice? And let me show you another one. Now do you see what we have here? Now do you understand? This is going to be great. It's a tough subject matter coming up, of course, but I'm going to do my best to make it fun. Why? Because I'm in the fun generation. When I moved to Portland, it was in a band. Why? Because if you move to Portland, it has to be in a band. That's the federal law. Also in that band was Mr. Charlie Butts. And I'd like to thank him right now for being part of my life and coming through in a difficult time.
You're welcome, and thank you for being in my life, man. We had a great time.
And we also have one other person in that band, Frank Tate Jr. Do you have anything to say to Frank?
Frank, where are you, man? Let's play. Come on.
Frank, ask the warden to let you give us a call. Thank you. Okay, now we get to the story. Before I moved to Portland, Oregon, I used to live in the most complicated place in the entire world. And no, I'm not talking about Los Angeles. I was born and raised in the Middle East. I mean, we had problems from last week, we had problems from last year, we had problems from 2,000, 4,000 years ago. It was like the official home of the problem. I mean, a place where old problems went to live on forever. And I mean, some of them were homegrown, some of them came from abroad to them. But the point is, there was a lot going on. 3 religions in one holy city. Don't even start. Now, when I was born, I had a big head. I mean, I'm not going to kid you. I had a giant skull. That's part of my deal. You know, I just have a big head. That's why I wear the hat. You know, as soon as I was 4 or 5 years old and I could lift my head off the pillow and go outside, I started hearing big head jokes. You know, and it's very hot in Arabia, extremely warm. I myself first realized I had a big head when I noticed a small flock of sheep was following me around just for the shade. But did the giant skull have any brains in it? At first the answer appeared to be no, especially when the boy announced that he had built a car. Later, however, he would amaze his teachers when he enlisted the help of his classmates and built a cargo plane. Now, I was one of those kids who knew I wanted to be a musician from the beginning. I remember seeing the band instruments in the school gymnasium and just knowing that's what I was going to do. And so by about 4th grade, I was already in the school band playing snare drum and trumpet, and we'd be marching around in these uniforms in the Saudi Arabian heat. By the way, with a giant head, these band hats had no give to them. They were shells. They were hard shells. So it was, you know, if you could picture a kid with a big head playing the drums, marching around in like Saudi Arabia temperatures with like a C-clamp vise on his head, that was me. One day I was at band practice and a kid came up to me, and I believe his name was Steve Gellner. If I'm wrong about that, I'm really sorry. He had a little portable tape recorder. They had portable battery-operated tape recorders, but they were reel-to-reel. I don't know if you even remember those. And he said, check this out. Hit the button, and it was Louie Louie by the Kingsmen. You know what? I think it's time for a field trip. What do you say? Today's field trip takes us to 409 Southwest 13th in Portland, Oregon. In that building across the street, a band called the Kingsmen recorded their version of Louie Louie, and it went on to rock the world. It even made it to a group of kids in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. So Walker and I started playing rock and roll in grade school. He had a drum set, I had a guitar, and we had very little access to records. There was no record store per se. We existed on whatever anyone could bring back from the States. There was a magazine shop in Al-Khobar, a little village where I bought some rock magazines, cut out the pictures, Buffalo Springfield, the Stones, the Byrds, the Paul Revere and the Raiders, and over Mark Lindsay's picture I wrote Superstar. Paul Revere and the Raiders, we had a few of their records and they meant a lot to us. Kicks, I love the song Kicks to this day. I think it's one of the great rock and roll tunes from that era. And guess what? The guy sitting behind me doing this radio show, that's Mark Lindsay, Paul Revere and the Raiders. That's the magic of America. I don't know if you appreciate that enough. That's an actual rock star sitting there. And if you grew up in Arabia, you know what I mean. It's just too much. Think of how fortunate the timing was here. My head would have never worked during the Elvis years, but it was the Beatles' time now. I didn't have a big head. I had long hair. It was a fraud. But it didn't matter. I still felt cool. And together with Walker Heywood, we began, at the age of 9 or 10, to form a band. We felt like we had a band. So I was proud of my little rock group. I even bragged about it to one of my teachers, Miss Miller. I said, we could be geniuses like Mozart. And she replied, we would have known by now. She had a Texas accent. She'd say things like, Billy, you might be impressed with how you did on this assignment. Who knows, maybe your classmates are impressed. Maybe your siblings are. Maybe your parents are. But I just want you to know that I am not impressed, because Billy, you could do so much better. She put a lot of good pressure on us. I mean, she was a great teacher, a cool person, a real spark plug, and a real formidable presence in our lives. And that's why I appear so nervous right now, because I'm about to see her again for the first time in over 30 years.
Hello, darling.
Back then, she would go on to play a big part in all of our lives. Walker's, my family's, a lot of kids at that school. And she's a big part of this story.
Yes.
Well, we have a legend here today. One of the great people I've ever met. We knew her, when I first met her, we called her Miss Miller. May I call you Doris?
Absolutely.
This sweetheart here was my 5th grade teacher. And I guess I should ask, how was I as a student?
Well, one of my best.
So that's your story, huh?
And I'll stick with it.
Okay, well, I just happen to have right here my report card from 5th grade. Do you recognize that signature right there?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Good penmanship, isn't it?
Not bad
Not bad.
for a left-hander.
Let's see what it says about my penmanship in here. Could you read
Shall
this
I read
comment?
it? Okay.
This one, the third one down.
Billy's handwriting has deteriorated to the point that even he can't decipher it.
So in other words, I had already peaked. By the time I got to her grade, my handwriting had already reached the summit of its excellence, and it started going downhill. It wasn't just not making progress, it was going backwards. Is that what you were saying here?
Sounds like it.
And then I was always going to go into music. Could you read this second comment here?
Okay. Bill made a failing grade on his music test.
Whoops. I should have read that one myself. It could have saved me a lot of grief over the years. I am in the fun generation. I think right now what has happened to the world is that the fun generation has been forced to get serious about things, and we're terrible at it. I mean, we are awful at it. And we pretend all the time that we're serious, tough guys, but we are just a few decades away from standing by that keg, passing the bong, and it's not working. It's not working. And it's actually very sad because these are important times. I'm not making this film out of a lighthearted spirit. I really believe that I have something to say that could help because we are off the path. The balance between serious and fun is way off. And one of the ways you can tell is that we call things wars that aren't really wars. Never were wars, like the war on obesity. Obviously, I've been a hostage in that one myself, but I just wonder how we went from serving in the military to a serving of pie. How did that happen? How do we go from, wars with front lines to buffet lines? And then there's the war on Christmas. The war on Christmas. What do you get if you serve in the war on Christmas? A candy cane? Is that what you get? One tip, if you are going to go topple Santa Claus, don't disband the elves. Keep them. You'll need them for security on the North Pole later. See? Comedy writer. Can't help it. And the final one that is the most serious, most dangerous, and most scary is the global war on terrorism. A war that will not end in our lifetimes. Now, first of all, just imagine General Eisenhower the night before D-Day talking to the troops and saying, we're going in to Normandy tomorrow. It's going to be very intense, and I just want you to know if you live to be 100, we're not going to win this war in our lifetimes. I mean, talk about a leadership. Go get them, I would suggest that if the greatest military superpower in the history of the world cannot win a war in our lifetimes, it's because it's not a real war. And this is the subject that really gets to me, because I know about terrorism. Growing up in the Middle East, I made friends with someone when I was around 10 years old. His name was Charles Walker Heywood. We called him Walker. So how was Walker as a student?
Very good. Very good student.
He's a new kid in the neighborhood. He actually moved from Ras Tanura, which is an oil port on the Persian Gulf, to Dhahran, which is my hometown, where I was born. And made friends with him right away.
Everybody in the school knew him as a little kid. He just transferred from the other, one of the other spots in Ras Tanura.
Boom. Let's go back to Ras Tanura.
Walker was born in Arabia, right beside the Persian Gulf. He watched the sunlight on the water, many shades of gold. It's a Ras Tanura day today. I'd like to be here by the seaside. It's a Ras Tanura day
Okay, I've got to tell you something right at the beginning. This is not Rostanura. But I did search the entire state of Oregon and found some sand dunes just for you. Okay, you've probably figured out by now that this is not the Persian Gulf. This is the Pacific Ocean. We've got some 18-foot swells out there today, so if you see a whale, it'll probably be body surfing. When you look at the earliest pictures of Walker Heywood, he looks like just another happy, secure American kid growing up in the 1950s. But I'm going to do something now that's very unfair. I'm going to tell you the real story behind these pictures. And the reason I'm going to do that is because you need to know that to understand what made Walker Heywood great. And the person I'm going to be unfair to is his biological mother. See, she suffered from mental illness. And Walker grew up in an atmosphere of deteriorating mental health on her part. He would come home from school and things would not be quite right. I mean, there was a big incident when he was 5, I believe. I won't even go into that one. But when he came home, I think when he was around 9 or 10, one time from school, she had completely broken down. She had a nervous breakdown. And imagine, I know some people have this experience out there. He wasn't the only one, but I have trouble imagining how tough it would be to watch your mom lose it mentally, especially when it scared her. She was ultimately diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, so she was very frightened. And that would just be unbelievably heart-wrenching to experience. So this particular day, they called in an ambulance and they came and right in front of him sedated her and took her away and shipped her off, sent her off to the United States to a mental institution. So Walker lost his mom right in front of him one day. And because we were in these oil towns in Arabia, we didn't have extended families around, so something like this meant that, a lot of changes would have to take place. Like Walker's younger sister Laura was sent off to live with relatives back in America. He had an older sister who I never got to know that well. I liked her, but she was several years ahead, so by the time I knew Walker, she was almost always in a different phase than we were. But essentially what happened was Walker one day just saw his family blow apart.
Now wait a minute, I'm not trying to manufacture sympathy for Walker Heywood. Like at the Olympics. He's skating with a heavy heart tonight because last week his younger sister flunked her driver's test. This thing with Walker's mom was a cataclysmic event in his life. It was a giant snow-capped mountain that dropped out of the sky and landed in Arabia. But it didn't make him weird or angry or bitter. He was kind. He was inclusive. And it was like he was saying, if this is happening to me, maybe something's happening to you. I'll check on you. Now, in those years, he did spend a lot of time in this rocking chair, rocking back and forth. He was sad, but he was working it out. He was thinking it out. And he turned the pain into charisma. And he turned all the turmoil into humor. And let me tell you, as a professional comedy writer, I can certify this. The boy was hilarious. And it wasn't those mean put-down jokes, big head jokes maybe. It wasn't like that. Walker's humor was based on the joy and absurdity of life in the universe. By the way, this is Mount Adams. Speaking of life in the universe, looks peaceful, doesn't it? It's a UFO hotspot, and yes, I do mean that.
There it goes.
That's really bright. Wow.
Wow, that's a great shot.
So often in these lives that get cut short, people talk about what might have been, the greatness that lay ahead and all that. And it's true. Walker was heading, for a career in law, maybe, and diplomacy, and who knows what. It was all out there. And lots of us, we just couldn't wait to see what he came up with. But the point is, Walker was already great. The way he handled this thing with his mother proved that he was already great at 10. It made him great. And that's why I bring up the pictures from Rastanura. But he was with us now in Dhahran, and he was about to have a big impact on a lot of people's lives, including one school teacher named Doris Miller.
I moved to 5th grade for the next teaching year, and both Billy and Billy, is that okay?
That's okay. What am I going to do now?
And Walker were in my class. Every so often we had parent-teacher conferences, and we also had open house. And at the first open house we had, Walker brought his dad in. He was living alone with his dad at the time, and introduced him to me.
So, in other words, Walker moves to from Rastanura. I become friends with him, and all of a sudden, our 5th grade teacher is becoming friends with Walker's dad. A sweet story developed here, folks. A really sweet story, because you know how it is when you run into your teacher out in the community, at the store or whatever. It's sort of awkward. We never felt that way about her. She came over, she played the guitar and sang, and we liked her. We never, snickered, oh, the teacher's going out with Walker's dad. We accepted her, and it was, I thought, a very sweet story. How would you say you were received in that situation?
And I didn't perceive any difference in the way the children reacted to me.
Then what happened?
Well, Walker had a little sister who was living in the United States with an aunt whom he adored, the little sister. And Walker's dad and I got married and brought Laura back to Arabia.
Well, I'm at the Portland International Airport to pick up Laura. Haven't seen her in over 34 years. Last time I saw her, Walker was alive. So this is going to be one of life's heavy moments. And I've got a sign for her in case we don't recognize each other, but somehow I hope we do. And I hope I hold it together. Well, part 2 of the very special guest category. Laura, Lo, as we used to call you. You don't call yourself that anymore?
No, not so much. I mean, my friends from Arabia still call me that pretty consistently, but everybody else is just Laura. On a good day, anyway.
Well, I remember the day she came back to Dhahran. She was a cute little kid, about this big, and we had a lot of fun that first day trying to make you feel welcome and everything.
And I remember getting off the plane, and there were all these people there to greet us, and I just couldn't figure out who they were, and they were friends of the family. So it was a big, giant party.
And you took to Dhahran. You were born in Rastanura, right?
Yeah, I was born in Rastanura, and I left, I think, when I was around 4, maybe somewhere in there, and had been in New Jersey. So, yeah, I was happy to get back.
I remember you were very protective of Walker. You really just, I mean, one day we were all wrestling. There was like 5 or 6 kids wrestling. You were like, don't hurt Walker, don't hurt Walker. Do you remember that kind of, you just doted on the guy, as I recall.
Yeah, he was my big brother, and he was, yeah.
That was a remarkable time, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. He was Immediately, my son.
So Walker and I started playing music. He had a drum set. I showed him how to hold the drumsticks. And since I had experience at the beginning from school band, you know, I had a little advantage there. But he quickly became, imagine all the stuff he wanted to get out of his system. So there was another group in another part of town, also friends because they were, you know, from adjacent blocks. It was those years. Mike Morrow, Walter Randall, and Steve Simon. And they went on to be the genesis of a legendary rock band from Dhahran, because there was 2 guitarists and a bass. So Walker joined them in around 7th, 8th, and 9th. And they had a band called the White Apple Band, or White Apple. And, you know, so by the end of 6th grade, I was already done. I was already a rock and roll has-been. It wasn't going to happen for me. Today's field trip takes us to a rock and roll emergency. Somewhere in around 10th grade, the idea was proposed that I would play the bass and join a new band with a singer named Dave Collier, and put together another band, and that's what happened.
And thus, a rock group was born, the Rubber Band. And think of it, just by forming, we automatically became one of the top 2 or 3 rock groups in the entire country. In fact, I think there was only one other rock band in all of Arabia back then. They were called the Leaky Roof Circuit, led by an outgoing singer named Beanie Mandis.
Well, we have a special cameo appearance here today. This is Beanie Mandis. If you were a kid growing up in Dhahran, Abqaiq, or Ras-Nur, Saudi Arabia back in the 1960s, this man was a legend, a rock god, and bigger than life.
Well, thank you. That's a wonderful introduction. Everything Bill has said is accurate.
Well, I guess my question is, how did it feel when a younger, newer, perhaps more exciting band suddenly started moving into your territory?
You're talking about your own band, I believe, right?
Yes, the Rubber Band.
Rubber Band. Ooh, clever name.
Well, hold on, man. Your band was called the Leaky Roof Circuit. Hello,
Yeah.
we're in Arabia. I mean, how would you even know if the roof leaked? I mean, there's no water.
Speaking of water, have you got any Persian Gulf stories in this?
Well, there's so much going on. I couldn't get to everything. There's just not time for everything in this movie. I mean, Beanie was a great spear fisherman. He was legendary. Once again, spear fisherman with your brother Mike, Jim. These guys were studs.
We lived underwater, actually. We did. There was, I've got a good story, and I know you've got time for this. There was once I was down, I was about 30 feet. Okay, I was free diving. I didn't take the tank.
I don't want to cut you off, man. I mean, it's just, Walker and I did a lot of scuba diving. We went skin diving a lot. We had, a million encounters, sharks, sea turtles, dolphins, stingrays. I mean, it was...
It's the one-upsmanship now, too. I didn't tell you what I saw when I was down there.
No, but I mean, what I'm saying is I didn't put any of those stories in because it wasn't time for everything. I mean, I didn't put anything in about the Dhahran school. I mean, we were class officers. I was the president of my class. Walker was president of student council. We didn't mention all that stuff. We didn't even get to the part about what happened after we left the Dhahran school in 9th grade. We had kids traveling through Europe, 15, 16, 17, going off to boarding schools, unchaperoned, partying their brains out. I mean, it was just an epic time, but there just isn't time for everything.
Well, it's time for one short one, too. Okay, I was in Beirut. I was at the bar. I was 14.
Stop. Please, dear God, stop.
How about some baseball stories? I was on the 1963 Dhahran Steelers. We were the champions. I think we got beat once, and that was about it.
Yeah, it was a great team. 1927 Yankees had nothing on them. Sure, I mean,
no, I still carry this with me. Okay, I've still got it there. It says 1963. It says Bill Mandis. Some of you don't know that name. It says Bill Mandis.
This is
you
just
want a tighter shot on the floor?
Well, I was on the Dhahran Pirates. We were champions too. I don't break my trophy out every 5 minutes.
Yeah, but the difference is that we looked like champions. If you could take a look there.
Hold on. Hold on a second.
The third from in the back there.
Hello. How about this promo shot?
All right. I don't think this should be one-upsman.
Part of my endorsement deal.
Let me see that.
Yeah.
You see it too.
I've got the.
His fly is open.
I've got the team stats right here. Oh, I led the league in hitting my last year. I forgot that. Sorry. You might have detected a little bit of a rivalry here, and I think it stems from the rock bands. I mean, we kind of encroached on their territory. In fact, one legendary night in Dhahran, there was a battle of the bands. They lined up at one end of the auditorium. We were at the other. All the kids from the three towns parted in between. And it was, you know, I tell you what, they took a bunch of pictures from that night. Why don't I show them, and we'll give you an actual Walker Heywood drum solo so you can tap into his spirit. Are you okay with that? I mean, you look like you're pouting over there.
That's that Battle of the Bands thing there. They weren't really in the middle of the auditorium there. They were really a little bit closer to our stage.
You want stories? Do you want me to tell them the story of the cheerleaders when we were, you know, late at night with those two cheerleaders?
We don't have time. You know, as far as I remember, Bill, I don't think anybody really knows who won the Battle of the Bands that night.
I'd like to think it was the kids who won.
I like to think it was rock and roll that won.
The cool thing was, in Mandus family's last Christmas in Arabia, some of our band wasn't there and some of his band wasn't there. We actually formed a temporary band. There was peace amongst the rivalry, and he was our lead singer, and chanteuse, really. And Walker and me and some of the guys, we backed him up, and, you know, so that was a cool way to...
It was a nice little merging in there. Everybody was in good spirits, and...
yeah, peace amongst the bands. How come the rest of the Middle East couldn't pull that off?
There you go.
Come on. Yeah, and then later, this is even a better part of the story. You know, that band I moved to Portland with, it blew up pretty dramatically. I mean, people went to prison. There was 10 years to get over it and all that stuff. And I was moping around Portland in 1988, and I ran into his sister, Mary Ann Mandus, who informed me that he was living like about 1.5 miles from my house. We got together, rocked out, formed a duo, and went on to perform around Portland for something like, I don't know, 19 years or something.
And I've never forgiven Mary. No, actually we had a lot of fun. Played a lot of different venues, taverns. Can I say tavern on this movie?
Mackenzie River.
We played up the Mackenzie River at the Mandus July 4th reunions a couple of times. Played the Seattle Hemp Fest.
Well, that was the trio that we did the national anthem with. But I want to say right now, Bean, thanks a lot for all the years. I mean, going back to when I was like 5 years old, you've been a hero of mine and a musician. And I just want to say, after all these years, it's over. I can't take this anymore. I can't take it.
I've been a hero of mine too. But Bill said a lot of kind things going back to the opening with the rock legend and that. I've got to say, Bill has distinguished himself. He's a great comedy writer. Jay Leno worships him.
Don't patronize me like this. Let me ask you one thing. Will you come back later and sing the closing credits with me for old time's sake, man? Come on.
No. Yeah, Bill, I've carved teas, and I'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
Okay, that was really heartfelt, you know? Very emotional. Thanks a lot, man. Beanie Mandus, ladies and gentlemen.
My pleasure. Boom. Bill McDonald.
So the glory years began. Walker and I played, we were the rhythm section. you know, bass and drums. So it was a tremendous time of, well, it's just an awesome years. And that lasted for 10th, 11th, 12th. I think we blew apart in like 72. We had a farewell concert. It was in the town newspaper and everything. And so it was sort of the end of the trail kind of thing when we got to, 1973.
We had arranged for Walker to come home for Christmas because it was going to be his last Christmas in Arabia. My husband, his dad, was retiring that summer. So a group of people who lived in Arabia were arranging for their children to come home for Christmas, and there were some 60-odd people who chartered a plane, a Pan Am plane.
It was my stepmother's birthday, December 17th, and they were at a party, and I was waiting for him to come home, and we were all going to go to the airport together. I think he was supposed to come in around 11:30 at night.
This group was going to fly in to Rome, and then to Beirut, and then on to Arabia, and we had the schedule and knew where they were. And it was December 17th, and it was my birthday.
I was at home waiting for them, and the phone rang, and it was a friend, Lisa Boynton, and she said that she heard there was trouble at the Rome airport.
We actually were at a birthday party that a friend was having for me, and Chuck, Walker's dad, got a phone call from headquarters, from the offices, that there were some teletypes coming in, that there had been a plane had been hijacked.
I think right after that my dad came home, and he was panicked, and he didn't really tell me what was going on, except to say there was a problem, and so we all got in the car to go to the airport.
We were supposed to meet him that night at midnight coming in from Beirut. We didn't. They were kept sending teletypes about people who had been rescued or they were taken to hospital from the flight. We knew very little about it. And we indeed went to the airport just in case some of them had gotten on the plane that was coming into Beirut. But when the plane from Beirut landed, there were none of the people on it.
All the families were just trying to get more information at the airport at the desk, but things were just really sketchy.
And by 3 o'clock in the morning, they received message that everybody who had been rescued or was in hospital had been identified, and Walker's name was not among those.
At least 34 persons are dead tonight as a result of an Arab terrorist attack and hijacking which began earlier today at Rome's Leonardo da Vinci Airport. The trouble started when security guards found 3 or 4 armed men in the passenger terminal. The Arabs grabbed some hostages when they were discovered and began shooting. At least 2 persons were killed in the terminal. The Arabs next firebombed a Pan American jetliner which was waiting to take off. At least 28 passengers were burned to death.
I was flying home from California to Massachusetts for Christmas vacation. My parents were in the States that year, and our custom was when you arrived, you would call home and say the plane made it safely and I'll be there soon. So I called from Logan Airport in Boston, Massachusetts, and my mom answered, and she said, Billy, I have to tell you something before you see it in the paper. And you have to understand my mom, if there was one molecule of hope that this wasn't true, she would have jumped on it and emphasized it, but she didn't. She presented it as a fact. She said a plane with a bunch of people from Tehran has been attacked in Rome, and Walker was killed. And after that phone call, I got up and I walked away from that phone booth, and I was about 10 yards away maybe. And this is the only part that I think really could be spiritual or whatever. But I turned back
and it seemed like everything just disappeared. And I looked at the phone as if that was the event. The phone call was what had happened. And I just remember feeling like I was actually communicating with Walker. I mean, I really felt like he was there. And I felt like I was speaking to him, maybe not out loud, I don't remember. But I do remember saying, I'm not giving up on you yet. But if this thing is true, I'm sorry and goodbye.
In the morning, the word was that he was still missing, and I was only 13. I thought that meant he was in a hospital, but of course he was safe because nothing would ever happen to him. And then a girlfriend called and she was crying and said she was sorry about Walker, and at that point I realized that he wasn't safe anymore and that he was dead, and maybe I hadn't been told. So we got on an airplane to go to Rome, all the families. The company chartered a plane, and when we got to Rome, we landed and we went into the airport, and there were all these reporters with cameras like flashing in our faces and stuff, and they took us in this room and shut the door, and they started reading lists. They listed the ones that were safe and the ones that were missing and the ones that were dead, and he was on that list.
My husband, after we reached Rome, was taken to the mortuary to identify the body, and the only identification aspects were Walker's shoes.
Walker had been burned. So from what I understand, he talked about the shoes he was wearing and some other things that would identify him. And that's how they identified him.
I was in the middle of, Logan Airport, and I don't think it would have been helpful to just start rolling around on the ground crying or whatever you do. So I immediately had to adopt a strategy to carry on, to press on. And what you do is you immediately start kind of going into a denial. And you say, well, it's not true, and we're just in that time where they're going to come back and say, hey, we made a mistake, sorry about all the commotion. It wasn't that Walker Heywood, it wasn't that Rome, it wasn't that Pan Am, and it wasn't that planet Earth, whatever. So I started walking, and then I saw a group of kids from my old boarding school. They got out that same day. So I saw people I knew, and they were approaching down this hallway, and I wasn't great friends with them, but they were in my dorm. We were friendly, and I think the best thing I could have done would be just to go over there and say, look, I just got some really horrible news, and I don't know what I'm doing. I need help, or, but what I did was I hid. I saw him, and I hid behind this wall. And so within seconds of finding out this news, I had already gone into sort of a denial, repression type thing, and I'd already isolated myself from my fellow humanity or whatever.
Now we had other decisions to make. We called all the relatives in the States to inform them of the tragedy.
So we had to call his mom in the States.
We had to make a decision about where we wanted to bury him. And the decision and Laura was included in all the decision making.
We initially talked about having him buried in the United States because my mom was very Catholic, and we thought that would make her happy. But after talking about it, his heart was in Saudi Arabia.
And we decided that Walker would want to come back to Arabia because he loved living there. He had been born there. And but there was one obstacle. We were in touch with the American consulate, who was in touch with the Saudi consulate, and there had never been a body transported into Saudi Arabia. So we had to get permission from the king, which was available in no time. And by 3 o'clock that afternoon, we were back on the plane on our way to Arabia. The body was sent later.
And we came back home right before Christmas. And I remember walking in the front door and seeing Walker's Christmas stocking. And that was really upsetting.
And all the way home, I thought to myself, you know, when I get there, the bus is going to arrive and they're going to say it's just not true. Sorry about the call. Sorry about putting you through this. But I got there, it arrived in Greenfield, Mass. My dad was there, some of my siblings, and I could see when I got off that no one was saying anything, and it was true. I still had a little short ride home to the farm. And then finally, I had a chance to kind of react. And it was snowing on the ground and just icy, and I put everything inside, and then I walked outside to the driveway. We had a real long driveway, and I lost it. That's where I lost it. Hours later, after hearing it, you know, and there were these huge chunks of ice along where they plowed the driveway, and I was just kicking them, and they were just poof in the powder. I mean, I should have broken my foot on these things. I was just kicking them and crying, and the thing that I realized, well, I was very sad about it, of course, but also I was mad. That's the thing that I never experienced, being angry like that. I was just so damn mad that people would do this to my friend.
On their way home, they made a stop at Old Rome. Yeah, little knowing that the time had come for them to die. I was so down, so twisted up and turned around, and almost too mad to cry. So what are you gonna do if I ever catch up with you? You wanna kill my friend? You're gonna beg for your life to end. On their way home, they made a stop at Old Rome. Yeah, little knowing that the time had come for them to die.
Season 1973.
Worked on it my whole life to get over it. You know, it's not one of these things you want to carry around.
Walker was a great loss. It's something that you don't get over.
So we had the funeral right after Christmas. We had a service.
And it was held in the auditorium,
Oh.
and which was completely full, of course.
I wonder, I mean, I'm sure it's hard to remember. I just wonder who my buddies,
I don't know.
any of the band there?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, you were probably,
I really don't know.
yeah.
I didn't.
Anyone who knew Walker was there. I mean,
That's right, and people who didn't know Walker. This
Yeah.
was a tragedy to the whole community.
Oh, the whole town. I mean, most of the people on the charter were relatives of people we knew. But we also had people we grew up with, and including Robin Haggart from my brother's
Yes.
grade, who survived with burns 30% of her body. One of the heaviest things about this whole project was calling Robin and talking to her and her mother about what happened in Rome. Laura had sent me a bunch of newspaper clippings from the incident, and among them there was a poem that Robin wrote shortly afterwards. And it struck me that it had more wisdom in it than I was to show in the ensuing decades.
Walker. He was a guy of sophistication, a guy of love and joy, reaching out to be a man, from being just a boy. Many of us loved him. Others wouldn't know. And since he's gone forever from us, we must sigh and let him go.
So what happened with me was that I don't want to say avoided the surviving family members, but I knew they were leaving in 74, the summer of 74. And I stayed in the States until you were gone. And I'm sorry about that, but
I would like to have seen you.
it wasn't that I couldn't face you, but I just felt like I didn't want you to see me or me to see you, because I realized that I was different, and I was, I was bad news. I was a reminder of bad news, sort of. But I also just had this sort of darkness to me. I was like angry, and I didn't want my family to see me either. But I did end up going after you left Tehran. I went back, and then that fall I was supposed to see you in Mexico, but that fell through. And one thing led to another. So even though it's not something I'm proud of, something like 34 years have passed since I saw this person here that I used to see every day over at the house, and we all grew up together. So I just want to say I'm sorry I didn't do more or come through in that way that you're supposed to, but that's just what happened.
Well, I understand. It was really tough. It was a hard time. And I'm just glad to see you now.
Laura was exactly the same person as I remember. Sweet and forgiving, understanding, nice, fun. And Doris was, well, she's the same tough teacher as always. Walker had been a very tough assignment, and Doris was not impressed with how I handled it. My family left the Middle East in 1975, and I moved to Portland, Oregon with my band from college. I'll always love the Middle East, but it can really break your heart. Sometimes I wish I was from someplace less violent, like Detroit. It's always the same old problems, too. When Walker died, he was with a lot of people, ordinary civilians, trapped in a confined space where he was burned and killed by weapons made of phosphorus. Over 35 years later, another group of people, ordinary civilians, trapped in a confined space called the Gaza Strip, were also burned and killed by weapons made of phosphorus. It just goes on and on. After Walker died, I spent years thinking about how innocent children could end up being terrorists. What caused this? I came to believe most of them were ordinary people, pushed by despair and anger till they snap. How many of these scenes could you take before you snapped? Here's some recent photos off the internet. Are we looking into the eyes of future terrorists here? What will these kids be like in 10 or 15 years? You know they weren't born with hate in their hearts. Is this how it happens? When most people complain about the war on terror, it's because of the damage it's done to America. The doctrine of preemptive strikes, torture, the loss of freedom, and the huge expense. And yes, it's true. The war on terror has really hurt America. President Bush used to love talking about how tough he was on terrorists, but for what he's done to this country, the terrorists should send him a plaque. You can't solve a conflict if you only take one side. What bothers me most about the war on terror is that it is a fraud. It elevates the problem to superstar status and gives government the excuse to do anything they want. Foreign policy shouldn't be driven by responses to terrorist events. That gives them way too much power, and then the temptation to fake a terrorist incident becomes too great.
And never ever trust a phony government name like the War on Terror. How can it be if it makes terror worse? And yes, it does bother me that they used what killed my old friend to try and achieve their own wretched goals.
It's harder all the time to turn it around. Thinking about my life story. Yeah, I've been thinking how I might have done it differently, but I gave it my best shot. And there's really no point in thinking back with second thoughts, or saying to the very end, if I only had a chance to do it all again. That part is done, this is now, you go on from here. There ain't no point in sitting around crying in your bed, 'cause if it didn't work out the way you planned, you can't live it over again. Because it doesn't work like that. You can't live it over again.
Living in Portland was so different. I mean, the late 70s and early 80s were really fun times in this town. Okay, it was a little decadent. They talk about being in the gutter. Here's a picture of my band actually partying in the gutter. God, I love that group. It was a commercial flop, but it was an artistic triumph. Things started falling apart when our drummer went to prison. We were a good band when he was keeping time, not so good when he was doing time. I went on working as a banquet waiter and met a lot of amazing people. Eventually, I became a freelance comedy writer after Jay Leno bought one of my jokes. Thank you, Jay. Suddenly it all fit. Comedy is as close to an answer as I've ever had to the horror of it all. Not that it's supposed to be an answer, some of it's just silly and fun. But that's good too. As I always say, laughter is better than depleted uranium. Besides, when one of my jokes bombs, nobody gets hurt. You see two houses behind me, right? Well, this is an old neighborhood, it goes back to the 1800s. And there must have been a different building there in like 1941 because the address is no longer one of the addresses on these buildings. But at that address, 6111 Southeast 92nd, there lived another musician, guitar playing musician, and his name was Woody Guthrie. Woody Guthrie used to live right over there. That's amazing. Anyways, I bring that up because Woody had a song called "This Land is Your Land, This Land is My Land." And I can tell you right now that Woody did not write that song in the Middle East, because in the Middle East it would have been, "This land used to be your land, now it's my land." And you know, in a way that's what happened here too. And I mentioned earlier in this movie that the mountains would actually show what I'm talking about, and that's going to happen right now, because a land dispute would show up in many different ways, and one of them is with the names of these mountains. Look at these plaques. All these mountains used to have Indian names. Mount Hood isn't Mount Hood. It's only been Mount Hood for a couple hundred. It's Mount Hood now, but it wasn't Mount Hood before. It was an Indian name before. I can't pronounce it, but I don't have to know how to pronounce it because we took it. Mount St. Helens had a different name. Mount Rainier had a different name. And Mount Adams had a different name. So it was a land dispute. The thing that bothers me is all the spin about it. That's the thing that worries me. The Palestinians had their land taken from them. And now we're suddenly, since the time Walker was killed, we're suddenly in this era that they deserve to have it taken away because of the way they acted since it was taken away. And there's some kind of thing with Islamofascism, and they hate us for our freedom. I don't like where it's trending here. We have to keep it real, because this spin is spinning out of control and it's leading to World War III. That's one of the reasons I made the movie. This is serious, folks. First, I hope my head isn't blocking the mountain. Well, Doris and Laura left this morning. and I needed to do something heavy just to kind of wind down. So I'm up here on Johnson Ridge. That's Mount St. Helens. This is the blast zone. Been up here a couple hours and it's slowly lifting. You can see into the Horseshoe Crater, and it's just been a great experience watching the clouds that look so dark and ominous start to dissipate, and you can see a little snow up there. You can see steam in some parts of it coming up, and it's just a reminder that things get blown apart and then they come back, because right up there right now it is gaining lava at the rate of 10 cubic yards every 45 seconds. So that mountain is growing back, and cataclysmic events come and go, and then you grow back.
Well, Walker, there's your movie, and I really hope you saw it. It was great seeing Doris and Laura again, and working on this has almost been like a visit with you. But right now, it's time to get back to the living. Your death will always be a mountain in my life, but lately, it's looking a lot better. Goodbye, Walker.
Now I see your time has come and gone, and there's no use in asking why. Who could have known you'd go so soon? It's weird to have to say goodbye. I just hope it ended pretty fast, and that you didn't suffer long. Sometimes I think I want to know, but then again I could be wrong. And when I'm feeling down, there's no one else around. I think of how cool it was to have a friend like you. Now I see that everything has changed since these killers came for you. They broke the heart of our hometown. Now everyone is feeling blue. Growing up was such a different time. Everything was fun and light. We'd spend the day out in the sun and play the music half the night. And when I'm feeling low, there's no one here I know. I think of how cool it was to have a friend like you. Being friends was cool. Being friends was cool.
Now where's the award-winning smile from us? There you go. That's a great... I'm going to win an Oscar for this.
Yeah, you will.